Today we are pleased to present this exclusive interview with Chuck Palahniuk, author of over a dozen books, including the upcoming novel Invisible Monsters Remix. Now, Chuck, you just spent the afternoon in the studio behind the mic recording portions of your upcoming novel Invisible Monsters Remix for the audiobook edition. How was your experience?
How was my experience?
Yeah.
It was fun. It was, yeah. It's a Monday afternoon in Portland, Oregon. It's probably about the best thing going.
I have some experience in the studio myself. I narrated your last novel, Damned, and Paul Garcia, who's working behind the camera today, also narrated your books, Survivor and Pygmy. Now, what celebrity would you want, if you could pick anyone, to narrate one of your projects?
David Sedaris, because then it would sell like crazy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
With the release of Damned last fall, the upcoming release of Invisible Monsters Remix and Doomed, the sequel of Damned, set to publish sometime next year, this is a busy time for you and on the publicity circuit. Your publicity events tend to be very high energy, with you reading short stories, conducting audience participation contests, and giving away tons of party favors. How are you holding up in the midst of all this action?
I'm swearing I will never do it again. Every year I swear I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to order 3,000 5-foot inflatable brains. And already this year I have a garage full of stuffed kittens because of the tiger striped cat in Damned. And so, there's already 500 stuffed kittens for Chicago in July. And I swore I wasn't going to do it again. I should be on intervention.
Now, in regards to those party favors, you've had some pretty odd handouts at past readings. Giant inflatable brains, moose heads, bloody severed body parts come to mind. How do you decide what to bring to each party?
Tom Spanbauer, the man in whose workshop I started writing, one of the things he taught us was to keep your objects really limited and keep them reappearing so that they have greater and greater power through the narrative. And so something like the kitten in Damned that will come back and then be a major player in the next book, Doomed. That's the object I want to bring to the events, something that resonates as an object with the story itself. A few years ago, I got thousands of these bacon-scented air fresheners you would hang in your car. They looked like bacon, they smelled like bacon, and I would give them out to everyone in these huge auditoriums who would play with them until they themselves were smelling like bacon. And then I would read the short story Hot Potting from Haunted, which is about how people die when they fall into unmarked geysers and hot springs in national parks. And one aspect of that is that the smell that permeates the scene is the smell of cooking meat. And at that point, people are kind of tricked into scenting themselves to smell like cooking meat. And so the prop, the prize, has to be something that resonates with the story. The more viscerally, the better.
Now, for Invisible Monsters Remix, you took the original text of the popular novel and cut it with new material. Can you tell us about that process and what the new material adds to the story?
We're seeing an interesting kind of shift in how we think of media content. It used to be that a movie was this finished thing that was just this beautiful, shining, polished final cut. And now we have DVDs where you don't just get the final cut. You get what was left out of the final cut. You get the parts that weren't lit well enough. You get the parts where the actors messed up. You get all these supporting materials in addition to the shining, polished thing. And so in a way, with the rewrite of Monsters, I wanted to add those kind of supporting narratives that inform the story without interrupting it. And so the story doesn't really pass through those additional materials. They have to be found like Easter eggs. And I like the idea that a story is never completely finished. That the stories that stay with us the longest, like the Bible, are stories like Shakespeare that are being constantly reinterpreted. And so that kind of porosity allows them a greater life in people's minds. And so keeping Invisible Monsters, porous, keeping it malleable, I think is kind of a wonderful, fun thing.
In the introduction to Invisible Monsters Remix, you mentioned that in order to get the original published, you hammered the story into a nice, smooth, straight line. You threw out the magic. Have you had to make any sacrifices, other sacrifices to your personal style over the years?
Not really. No real sacrifices. But when I first wrote Monsters and brought it to market, it was the early 90s. And it was such a different market. It really was that market where people, bookstores, marketing people wanted to know exactly where to put that book in the store and who to approach about buying that book. And when Monsters came to the acquisitions board at W.W. Norton, the marketing people said, we have no idea whether this would go in literary fiction or in comedy or in YA. They had no idea how to pigeonhole it. And now the market is much more kind of fragmented. And I have much more of an identity. I don't really fit into a lot of broad categories, but people will accept the fact that it's a Chuck book, and that in itself has become a category. Mm-hmm. So right now I can take the chance of bringing the book back to the way it should have been, now that it's proved itself after 13 years.
Yeah, I think we were doing the math about that.
Yeah.
How long ago it was.
Most books don't even stay in print 13 years. And so it amazes me that Fight Club is still in print as a hardcover. Books just don't stay in print very long.
Do you have any plans to release any of your other titles in their uncut form, or have most been true to your original vision and intent?
They all have. There was a few years ago, I donated what they call the foul matter of Fight Club. It's the manuscript that goes to the editor, and the editor marks it up, and you get it back all butchered. Mm-hmm. And I donated that to a charity. It was auctioned off for I think a domestic violence shelter. But I'm glad it's gone. I would never rewrite the book. Yeah. So Monsters is really the only one that I held back on, because it was the first one.
Does your commercial success allow you to take more chances with your work? Really pushing it.
I don't think I've never not pushed it. I think I've always found some way of getting what I wanted. And it amazes me the conversations I've had with editors over the years, where, like in Romance, the story that I read just this afternoon, having the conversation where the editor was saying, we need to say the word tampon. We need to identify it as a tampon in the bus scene. And me saying, no, it can never be literally stated as a tampon. It's got to stay a food metaphor through the whole story. It can never become the literal thing, because that's where all the humor ends and it becomes not debatable anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, if anything, the things I have to fight for are the things that I do wrong. Because especially copy editors are trained to make everyone write correctly and speak beautifully and state factual things. And so I love having the characters in Invisible Monsters identify the pink triangle as the symbol for Nazi homosexuals. Because in the first version of Monsters, the paperback version that exists, the copy editors corrected that to the Nazi symbol for homosexuals, where I had worked so hard to get the characters to misinterpret it, and then to have my hard work about getting things wrong intentionally corrected. That's the hardest job. It's where you want a character to get things wrong so that the reader feels superior to the character, and the character draws a greater humor and a greater sympathy. That's so hard to do, to get things wrong intentionally. When you talk about how people interpreted songs when they were children, and the lyrics that they made up because they couldn't understand the lyrics are so charming. Or how they misunderstood aspects of sexuality as children. The ways that they got those things wrong are so endearing and so engaging, so much better than the truth. And so it's what we get wrong is so much more sweet than what we get right.